All right. I think we are completely alive now, both here in Zoom and also on the Elizabeth Kostova Foundation website on Facebook. So, hello everybody. I'm Milena Deleva.
Здравейте всички, аз съм Милена Делева.
I'm the executive director of Elizabeth Kostova Foundation. Welcome to the virtual stage of our annual Capital Literature program. This year's edition is called Writers and Influences and invites contemporary writers to present their influences or literary friendships. The latter is the case of this second event from a series of 8 presentations, and it's on John Berger, introduced by another acclaimed author, Colum McCann. It is a great pleasure to introduce our distinguished guest today. Colum McCann is an award-winning Irish-American writer. He has been the recipient of many international honors, including the National Book Award, the Impact Prize, election to the Irish Arts Academy, several European awards, the Best Foreign Novel Award in China, and an Oscar nomination. He is the co-founder of the nonprofit Global Story Exchange organization, Narrative 4, and he teaches at the MFA program in Hunter College. He is the author of 7 novels and 3 collections of stories, including Let the Great World Spin, Transatlantic, and his most recent novel, Pyragon. You must have fought for that title with your publisher, Colum. The last time I heard this word was in my geometry class in high school. So when I was looking, working on this event and looking for a moderator, I came across only 2 mentions of John Berger in my native Bulgaria. Ella's a TV obituary of Berger following the news of his death, but with a very radical claim from a Bulgarian visual artist who said that he has no dealings whatsoever with artists who don't know the work of John Berger, referring to his seminal work, Ways of Seeing. But the only work of Berger in translation in Bulgarian, which I was able to find, was in an essay in the literary magazine Pet Nekugash, founded by Olga Nikolova, and this is how we got our moderator today. In addition to being the founding editor of Pet Nekugash, Olga is also a translator, an essayist, and a critic. She currently teaches writing and American literature at the American University in Bulgaria and holds a PhD in English from Harvard University. Before I turn it over to Colum McCann, some practicalities. If you are watching us from Facebook, and if you need translation into Bulgarian, please migrate to the Zoom webinar because only the original video will be streamed on Facebook. And the link will be posted shortly on Facebook. Ако гледате събитието във Facebook и имате нужда от превод, моля да се присъедините към вебинара в Zoom. The webinar is also your only chance to get a discount code for the Bulgarian edition of Let the Great World Spin. Нека големия свят се върти от Жене 45. We will post the code here in the Zoom chat. And we were talking that maybe or not, Colum will start reading from Ulysses in anticipation of Bloomsday tomorrow, but that's not for sure. We'll see. And maybe, and maybe also as a revenge to John Berger's father, who, upon finding Berger's copy of the book, confiscated it. Although I'm sure no revenge. He sounds like a very fine, decent, wonderful human being. And I remember how he showed Tilda Swinton in the Seasons in Quinces how his father was actually peeling an apple, his technique of peeling an apple. And there was something loving in this gesture. So following this conversation and moderated discussion, we would love to hear from you. Please use the Q&A to ask your questions. Special thanks to the United States Embassy and Sofia Municipality for supporting the series and our interpreter today, Elena Alexieva. The translation into Bulgarian of the excerpt from To the Wedding Colum is going to read is translated by Elka Videnova. Thank you, Colum, for taking the time to share with us your literary friendship with another great storyteller. The stage is yours now.
Thank you so much. and I'm honored to be involved and to be in conversation with Olga. Olga, can you tell us about Bulgaria's relationship with the great John Berger before I tell you about my relationship with him?
I was actually surprised by the Bulgarian artist who apparently said in that TV program. I haven't seen the program, that he wouldn't deal with anybody who didn't know the name of John Berger. But on the other hand, I came across John Berger through Ways of Seeing, and I think that it's his most famous work. It's for those of you who don't know, Ways of Seeing was based on a TV show that John Berger did for Channel 4 or BBC, I'm not sure. And it's a different way of looking at art. Of course, it was um, his reading or his approach to works of art, as he himself would very openly say, was Marxist and revolutionary. Basically, he wanted to revolutionize the way we look at art. But I think that in Bulgaria, I also knew Berger mostly as an essayist, as an art critic. And it's been only recently that I started reading actually his fiction. And I find that he's absolutely an amazing writer of fiction. But at the same time, there's some kind of continuity between his art criticism and his fiction. We were discussing just before that it's kind of amazing that John Berger is not known in Bulgaria and that he was not translated at all during the communist regime because he was a Marxist. His perspective is very much to the left. He was a revolutionary. He said of himself that he was a revolutionary writer. But as Milenka pointed out in a conversation, before that, he was during the communist regime, he was not translated, perhaps because he was too much of a Marxist. And afterwards, he was not translated precisely because he was a Marxist, as a post-communist country, Bulgaria was trying to move away. How did you, but this is from the perspective of Bulgaria. So you get glimpses of Berger here and there, but we don't really know who Berger is.
Right, which is extraordinary, and then congratulations to you for bringing the translation into your magazine, and then congratulations to everybody here for bringing his name back up again, because it's going to be a name that will live in literary history. I mean, he is a writer who is adored by other writers in particular. I mean, another good friend of his would say, Michael Ondaatje. And Michael would visit him and spend time with him, and John wrote copious letters to people. It was always open, always available. One of the nicest, most decent, most extraordinary people that I've ever come across, and so I was sort of honored to meet him and to get to know him. But I knew him first through the literature. I mean, I first started reading him in my early 20s when I came from Ireland and I went to the United States, and I took a bicycle across the country, and I would go to all these little bookshops and pick up bits and pieces, and I can't actually remember the very first Berger it was that I read. But when I read him, it was one of those voices that when you hear it at first, you feel like you knew it forever. But also he was telling you things that you knew but you weren't entirely aware of, and a sort of whispering in your ear, a sort of deep human truth, and that's how I felt about him, and still feel about him, and whether it be in the essays, Our Hearts, Our Minds, Brief as Photocopies, or Ways of Seeing, or whether it be in the poetry, or whether it be in the fiction, he accessed something deeply, I suppose, deeply equitable, deeply humanist, and very, very, very decent, open to all sorts of ideas, but also a person who was, yes, revolutionary, yes, Marxist, but essentially a humanist at the very, very, very core. And so it's going to be fun to see, if this could spark something, say, in Bulgarian literature or elsewhere. To see how books come back. I've seen books come back in the past when writers start talking about other writers. One notable book being that called Stoner by John Williams, which is a book which is now considered an American classic, but was sort of lost up until about 20 years ago when writers started talking about him. Apologies for New York outside my window. You can probably hear the
Yeah.
sirens going, but listen, it's authentic Zoom time. But John, when I first met him, I read him, and I knew the work inside out, and I admired him, and I had talked about him in interviews. I'm gonna do you mind if I just go close my window?
No problem. Yeah.
No, they're gonna go. If they come back to arrest me, they'll know because I was talking about John Berger again.
Bloody Marxist. Yes.
It's the Bulgarian police are after us.
Oh, be careful. Yes.
Yeah. But I talked about him in interviews, and then one day, and this is the most extraordinary thing, I got this letter. A little blue envelope, came from France, and I opened it, and it was a beautiful letter. It's a handwritten letter on two sides of one sheet of paper.
So he wrote to you first.
Yeah, so I'm reading through this thing, and I'm thinking, this is a beautiful letter. Who is this? And I looked down at the end, and it said John, and in the letter he said, I've been reading your book, Everything in This Country Must, to my wife Beverly, and then I went to the envelope, and it was, and I knew who it was, and I almost it was a life-changing moment. It's when you sort of get your heart ripped open, and of course I immediately wrote back to him, and then we started a correspondence that lasted a number of years, and we met a number of times. But I always felt close to him. He helped edit some of my work at times. He would read it in advance, and I would read some of his work in advance, and there were many people like me whom he helped, and he was extraordinarily open, and I got to meet his family, and I had paintings around the house with from John and his son Eve, and so I'm very close, both on a sort of like a level of the work, and then on a sort of intimate human level. And if you want, I'll tell you a little bit later about one of the stories where he described where it was that he came from.
I'm afraid now that because the word Marxist is going to become one of the key words here, but you keep mentioning the word humanist, and in preparing some notes for our conversation today, one of the words that I noted down was humanity, because and I absolutely agree with you that he is somebody who will remain in literary history, because there's something in his work that goes absolutely beyond any sort of labels. He touches something it's very difficult to talk about it, isn't it? Yeah. It may have to do with a certain outspokenness, that he really thinks through what he sees, what he hears, and so forth. But I think also that in the gesture of writing to you, there's something similar, this kind of reaching out.
Yeah, why would he reach out to a writer like so much younger than him? It was an extraordinary thing, but he reached out to the world, and he cared about migrants, and he cared about workers, and he cared about what was going on in Palestine, and he cared about what was happening in Mexico, and he cared about the world, and so I'll tell you the story, okay? So one night I went to Paris, John is there. He meets me at the train station in Antony, and we walk back to his little house, which is in the sort of suburb, the banlieue of Paris, and we're there, and we have all these this food laid out, and we I brought some wine, and we had some vodka, and it was great fun. It was just lots of fun. We were telling each other stories about, growing up, and I was telling him about my father, who was a horticulturalist, and we just had this fantastic time. And I would quote bits and pieces back to him. He'd say things. I mean, I have lines in my head all over the place where, if I'd have known as a child what the life of an adult would have been, I never would have believed it. I never could have believed it would be so unfinished, for instance, and he would say these sort of things, and we were chatting away, and okay, let's be honest, we both got a little bit drunk, right? And at the end, in fact, at the end of the evening, we were like football players, we'd like changing shirts, and it was a fantastic time. But at one stage in the middle of the night, I was sort of drunk, and he said to him, "John, where are you from?" And he famously would take a long time to answer questions, right? Because he'd think about these things. But at this time he said, "Well, what's the guy talking about? Like, he knows who I am." I said, "Well, I'm from Stoke Newington in London." I said, "I know you're from Stoke Newington in London. And where are you from?" And he stopped, and he waited a long time. He said, I am a citizen." He stopped again. "I am a patriot of elsewhere." And I just thought, wow. I mean, and that's a difficult thing to even translate. And I hope Elena can I mean, it's a, how do you say?
Absolutely amazing. Yes.
I am not a citizen of elsewhere. Not a citizen of elsewhere, which was what his first thought was, but a patriot of elsewhere. So he belonged to it not just as a functioning participant, but as a person who loved elsewhere. So I think that he spent most of his time, most of his writing, most of his life in an elsewhere-ness that was very comfortable for him. And he cared about others much more than he cared about himself. And that's the true mark of somebody who's deeply human and engaged. And so he became the hero of a lot of people, in the Catholic movement, the Catholic workers movement. If you see, some of the people, the references to John Berger, in the Marxist movement, in the Zapistas, and all over the world. In Palestine, you will find people who will refer to John, and they'll refer to this thing that he said: "Never again will a single story be told as though it were the only one." In other words, these stories have to be told from multiple kaleidoscopic perspectives. But I think that if ever I were to write, a full, article or biography about him, I would call it A Patriot of Elsewhere. That was one of those things when you hear it, that you'll never forget it. It was really quite wonderful.
It is absolutely wonderful. Actually, this may be a good introduction to the novel, to the passage you wanted to read, to the wedding, because the book itself tells a story in many voices. Let's put it that way. It's not exactly many perspectives, but it's many voices.
Right.
So do you want to sum up the book and tell us perhaps why you chose precisely To the Wedding?
I mean, To the Wedding is one of those books that when you read it, you own it, and it becomes like a secret. In ways, some books you have, and they're public books, and lots of people love it, but when you read this book, I meet lots of people who adore this particular book, and see it as one of the ones that they would actually take with them. You know, if you had 5-6 books to take with you, you know, it was published by Bloomsbury in England, which is also my publisher, and published over here, I think, by Vintage or Picador. But you know, you'd meet young editors in Bloomsbury and in London, and it would always be their favorite book. And it's quite a simple story. It's set during the time of AIDS, but it's a love story and a beautiful story. And it involves journeys across Europe. It involves myth making, and at its core, it's probably one of his simpler, more eloquent songs, if you will. And I don't know where it flowed from, but it flowed from somewhere just gorgeous. So we're only going to read the first the first like page and a half. And thank you to Elena for the translation. Translators are amazing. She's going to have to translate that now into Bulgarian. I mean, this simultaneous translation stuff that goes on, how in the world do they do it? It's just extraordinary.
It's beyond me too. I think it takes a certain kind of training where you can split your brain in two, so one listens and one produces language.
Yes, like a bird sleeping in mid-flight, so they're flying and they're also sleeping at the same time. Okay, this is called "To the Wedding." Is the start, and the first 6 lines are lines from a verse. Wonderful, a fistful of snow in the mouths of men suffering summer heat. Wonderful the spring winds for mariners who long to set sail, and more wonderful still the single sheet over 2 lovers on a bed. I like quoting ancient verses when the occasion is apt. I remember most of what I hear and I listen all day, but sometimes I do not know how to fit everything together. When this happens, I cling to words or phrases which seem to ring true. In the Quartier around Placha, which a century or so ago was a swamp and is now where the market is held, I'm called Sobacanus. This means a man who herds sheep, a man from the mountains. I was given this name on account of a song. Each morning before I go to the market, I polish my black shoes and brush the dust off my hat, which is a Stetson. There's a lot of dust and pollution in the city, and the sun makes them worse. I wear a tie too. My favorite is a flashy blue and white one. A blind man should never neglect his appearance. If he does, there are those who jump to false conclusions. I dress like a jeweler, and what I sell in the market are tamata. Tamata are appropriate objects for a blind man to sell, for you can recognize one from another by touch. Some are made of tin, others of silver, and some of gold. All of them are as thin as linen, and each one is the size of a credit card. The word tama comes from the word tazo, to make an oath. In exchange for a promise made, people hope for a blessing or a deliverance. Young men buy a tama of a sword before they do their military service, and this is a way of asking, may I come out of it unhurt? Or something bad happens to somebody. It may be an illness or an accident. Those who love the person who is in danger make an oath before God that they will perform a good act if the loved one recovers. When you are alone in the world, you can even do it for yourself. Before my customers go to pray, they buy a tama from me and put a ribbon through its hole. Then they tie it to the rail by the icons in the church. Like this, they hope God will not forget their prayer. Into the soft metal of each tama is pressed an emblem of the part of the body in danger. An arm, or a leg, a stomach, or a heart, hands, or, in my case, a pair of eyes. Once I had a tama on which a dog was embossed, but the priest protested and maintained that this was a sacrilege. He understands nothing, this priest. He has lived all his life in Athens, so he doesn't know how in the mountains a dog can be more important, more useful than a hand. He can't imagine that the loss of a mule may be worse than a leg which does not heal. I quoted the evangelist to him. Consider the ravens, they do not sow or reap, they have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. When I told him this, he pulled at his beard and turned his back as if on the devil. Bouzouki players have more to say than priests about what men and women need. What I did before I went blind, I'm not going to tell you. And if you had 3 guesses, they would all be wrong.
Wonderful. Thank you, Colum.
Let me close my window. Sorry, I have New York
All right.
out. No. Sorry about that.
When the blind man selling tamata says that if you had 3 guesses, they'll all be wrong. Of course, immediately I wonder, okay, what could it be that
Exactly.
he's done?
Exactly. It's so much better to suggest than to tell. I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about John. I mean, he had a lot to say, but he wasn't necessarily didactic about it. He didn't shove it down your throat. He allowed you, which is very important, rather than told you, and he allowed you to feel. And especially in his fiction, he would put you in the pulse of the moment, so that you'd be there and you could feel it, and you could feel the tremors around you, and you could smell it, and taste it. And he's not necessarily always an easy writer to get. Like G is a tough novel. G, which won the Booker Prize in 1972, and for which, by the way, he gave half of his prize-winning money to the Black Panthers, and kept the other half because he was working on a book about migrants. But that novel G is a beautiful, complicated, it's an aria, really. It's an aria to our times. A really beautiful piece of work. But John was never one to force an opinion. But I mean, he had very strong opinions, and he would not back down, which was totally admirable. He's still around. I don't like talking about him in the past tense. I think he's still here.
In some cultures, actually, people talk about the dead in the present tense. He passed away just a couple of years ago, but of course, I mean, he's a very palpable presence, I think. G was the first novel that, just to fill in the audience a little bit if they're not aware. Did you said that you didn't remember which novel you read first?
I think I read a collection of essays first.
Okay. But I think that G was put him on the map as a novelist.
Yeah.
Although, correct me if I'm wrong, but he presents himself as a storyteller.
Yeah.
And not exactly as a novelist. So what do you think is the difference?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I remember talking with him in Mantova, in Italy, at the festival about this precisely, about fiction and non-fiction, what the words meant. And John would say, that the word fiction meant fictus, which was to shape, and we both knew that non-fiction is just as shaped as fiction happens to be, and so that the best word for it is not non-fiction or fiction, it's storytelling, because storytelling blurs the lines between these two things, because he would say that the real is imagined and that the imagined is real. It was very important that he was always telling a story, and I think he paid as much attention to every sentence in the non-fiction as he did in the fiction, as he did in the poetry. I think he had a particular graw, as we say in Ireland. It's an Irish word. Sorry to Elena. Graw means love. He had a particular graw for poetry. And didn't always. I mean, he wrote a number of poems, but not necessarily known as a poet. But the flashes of poetry that would come and that inhabit the storytelling were sort of truly extraordinary. So I think that he understood that he was a storyteller. He lived in the mountains. He appreciated people who would tell stories, could tell stories. He appreciated the curative properties of storytelling too. The way, and his book, about the country doctor, the story of a country doctor, is a gorgeous meditation on not only on storytelling but listening too, because nothing happens unless you listen. And John, if anyone was a great listener, or if anyone is a great listener, it is John.
Did you ever visit him in France?
Not in France, no, not in France. And
Not in the village of
no,
Quincy?
it bums me out. I feel like I know it because from we had letters and I know people who went there and and I should have gone. I had the opportunity to go, and it reminds me that we should take these chances when we actually have them. There are things that I was probably doing at the time. I had 3 young kids and stuff like that, and there are always reasons not to be able to make a journey. But I wish that but you can't end up regretting anything. But I talk to lots of people about him, and he exists in stories in sort of in incredible ways. So he becomes more and more vibrant, even as time goes on.
And he made a bunch of books and projects, actually, on Quincy, on the village where he lived in France, including with a photographer. So they documented. He was very eager to not only to create a portrait of peasant life in the village where he was living,
Right.
but also to allow these people, I think, to make a portrait of themselves, because it's connected to what you were saying about listening. Because he was, I can't remember where I read this, but he was talking about storytelling and how important it is in a village, that in a village where, I don't know, maybe it was a documentary where he was walking us around the village and he was saying there's 100 people, so everybody knows everything about everybody else. There's not much to hide. But at the same time, people constantly tell stories because this is how they understand themselves, or how they, they have this certain self-perception as a community.
Yes, yeah. And Into the Labours, the trilogy, what you're talking about, precisely finds the village and finds the shepherd and finds the ordinary person, but also finds the humor behind things. Cleaning out the toilets and doing all these different things and the little bits and pieces of life and the way people love one another, but also, I mean, he wasn't afraid to turn away from some of the violence that would be going on, and some of the more more horrendous things that would be apparent. Also, he wasn't he was full of sentiment, but not sentiment. There was not an ounce of sentimentality, but sentiment as in feeling.
Mhm.
And that's a hard thing to do, because when you risk that much sentiment, you risk people calling you sentimental, which would be a curse word for him, because he wasn't sentimental. He was interested in nostalgia, yes, and interested in saudade, that Portuguese word, that longing, and all these sort of things. But sentimental would be the last word with which you'd sort of describe him. But having the ability to discover what people were about, you know, and just sit and talk with them and smoke a cigarette or have a glass of Slivovitz or, you know, whatever else it happened to be. I remember he in Mantova, he brought some of the Slivovitz that he had made
He
from
called it Slivovitz.
yeah. And I mean, he had you know, his first book was called, you know, the the book about the artist. Oh my gosh, why is it? Why?
Guttuso or something.
No,
Yes, it's
portrait. A portrait. No, a painter of our time. A painter of our time. One of the main characters in it is a Hungarian artist, and so I think he was clued in pretty well to Eastern Europe. It would be interesting to find out if he ever went to Bulgaria. I mean, somebody might know if he did. I mean, you know, he traveled on that motorbike, you know, uh, in all sorts of different directions. So, you know, it's possible that at a certain
at
stage
some point he
he was
traveled to
there.
Bulgaria.
He was.
Yeah.
I know he was in Slovakia and places like that, and you
Well,
know,
into the wedding, the one of the characters is in Slovakia, isn't she?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, he had access to that, and part of him was kind of Eastern European. I kind of want to claim him as Irish at times, and he liked the Irish. He did. He got on well with the Irish. You know, he didn't like Britain, even though I mean he's British. I mean, this is where he born and raised, and he didn't like you know, he would not go to the United States. You know, even though I mean. Every hall would have been filled out. If you did the 92nd Street Y in New York, you know, and John Berger was coming, you would have had people coming from hundreds of miles. I mean, this is how sort of legendary and how adored he is.
Which period are we talking about? The 90s or?
Yeah, or 90s and the aughts, and you know, or even just before his death. I mean, you know, there's a famous radio host, Michael Silverblatt, who tried to get you know, John to come over to the States, and eventually just went over himself and recorded a series of programs with him. But there are people who you meet all over the States, and I'm talking about like in Alabama, in Texas, you know, in you know, rural parts who you know, who are real readers, and he would be one of their heroes. I mean, I there are a couple of writers who I would walk you know, 100 miles or 500 miles in order to see, and he would be one of them. Michael Ondaatje would be another. It's no surprise to me that they were sort of good friends, and you know, and other writers really admired him. You know, he never got to meet Jim Harrison, for instance, but Jim, the American poet, really liked John Berger. And Jim was like, I want to have a drink with that. I want to have a drink with him. And John was a good sort of drinking companion, and you know, and because he loved the world. What is it Lauren Isley says? We love the world, but we could not stay.
It's a beautiful thing. So you mentioned in our conversation just before that he continued, so he boycotted the United States. He would never come, and it was a conscious decision, a
Yeah.
political one.
Yeah, I mean, a political one. Yeah, I would say so. I mean, if he was coming over, I mean, he was pissed at what was happening in Iraq, and you know, and what was happening in Palestine, and you know, he felt that he might be co-opted in certain ways, but he wanted his work here, and he wanted his work to resonate, and he knew that it resonated. He wasn't being snobby about it. It wasn't being arrogant about it. I think it was a really genuine thing. I was like, you know, I wish I could go. I would love to go, but I should not go because I don't want to give credence to certain things that are going on. Do I agree with that? No, I don't necessarily agree with that. I would have thought, you know, go, John. For you know, people need to hear you. But you know, he's wiser about these things than I could have been. But I do feel that that it would have been better if he could have come across and appeared on the radio and TV or whatever else it happened to be, just so people could hear him, because it was so distinct. The voice is so distinct, and it's a different music than what we're sort of used to. It'll be really interesting to see when. I mean, what was your experience when you translated? What piece did you translate?
I've translated an essay on drawing, in which he describes how it's a wonderful essay because he goes into the simple gesture of putting one, with a pen, one line upon the empty sheet, transforms that emptiness into a world. It's a very simple gesture, but he has this ability of, because he really focuses on it, it really becomes a world. It's just a description of what drawing is an experience. In great
Did you translate that
minuteness.
yourself?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I would love to translate other things as well. Of course, I think that he would be a gain for any culture. Let's put it that way. I mean, for any thinking being, because he teaches you, as you said, he's not didactic. And it's curious that his political activism is also somehow indirect. He's done the most through the various books that including the fiction, the poetry, the photography books, the documentaries, the TV programs. He has an incredibly diverse oeuvre, right?
Right.
And this is his real activism, in a sense. It's much better. Maybe it's not much better. I don't know. But he's not walking down the street and shouting slogans. He's doing the work.
Yeah, I mean, but he's inspiring the people who actually eventually will maybe go down the road and shout slogans, and he would be, but he himself would feel that it is born from suggestion, and not born from any sense that you had to be overbearing. So there was something emergent about it. His principle is that these things come up, and I hesitate to use these words because it sound like it's wrong, but come up from underneath, from the ground, from the roots, from the soil, from where things grow, from rural areas in particular. And in this way, he was sort of ahead of his time. This whole principle of emergence is becoming more and more fashionable now. That things are coming up from underneath, and systems gain intelligence from working together. Like a flock of birds, instead of just one bird. One bird is a beautiful thing and operates on a tremendous scale, but 6 birds working together, or 100,000 birds working together in a flock becomes so much more clever. Then becomes this is random, it's crowdsourced, it's self-correcting, and I think that John had that principle in relation to storytelling, hoping that storytelling would form a sort of emergent idea of society, and constantly asking questions. I mean, he would be so annoyed at like some of the stuff that's happening nowadays, where people are just diseased with certainty. Like, I'm right and you're wrong. Whether it be on the right or the left or whatever, it's just like, no, it's so much more complicated than all of that. And the truth was messy. And lives were messy, and love was messy, and seeing was messy. The idea between what we see and what we know is never entirely settled in John Berger's work, so this ability to get in and scuff things up was something very, very much that belonged to his ethos, and didn't walk away either. He wouldn't go in, scuff things up, and then just walk away and do something else that was fashionable, but always stayed with it. Every book that he wrote was a book that he wrote forever. It's not always that way with an artist. Sometimes writers just walk away from the subject and they hope the book itself will do the actual work. But John was the person and the book, both at the sort of same time.
It's when you were talking about the flock of birds, I think that it may have to do with that elsewhere, where the group of birds operates as one. I think may have something to do with that elsewhere we were talking about earlier, which is also at the end of To the Wedding, when he says something about when everybody closes their eyes, this place where we are when we close our eyes. And he seems to see that place as some kind of common space that we can occupy. We can be together in our hope, in our compassion, in our empathy with others, and so forth.
Right. Yeah, the very last line is, saying another Tama was needed, made this time not in tin, but with voices. Mm-hmm. Here it is, place it by the candle when you pray. And you don't find many people, talking about prayer when they're coming from a sort of professedly, Marxist background and so on. And this is part of the humanist, like delicious messiness that was going on. There was something, Whitman-esque. I never actually talked to him about Whitman, and I can't really remember him mentioning Whitman. He probably has done, but this whole idea, every atom belonging to me is good as belongs to you. And do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. And there's something sort of brave about that.
What were some of his favorite authors,
Oh, jeepers. He was
so... Did you ever talk about literature when you were together?
Yeah, we talked about Ulysses. And it's kind of appropriate that tomorrow is Bloomsday. He had a great respect for Ulysses. As Milena said earlier, his dad took Ulysses away from him, which probably made him love it even more. But I never heard him say a bad word about anybody either, and that's well, he would about politicians and regimes and all that sort of stuff, but you wouldn't hear him like gossiping about other writers or distorting the truth or anything like that. And if he liked someone, he really liked them. But he was clued into to the great literature and the great poetry, and the people who felt and thought things. I remember I had a great dilemma one time in my life. So I wrote a novel called Dancer, which was a fictionalization of the life of Rudolf Nureyev, and I sent it to John, because John had been around at that time, and were sort of clued in, and he gave me back about 10 pages of notes, all of which were absolutely freaking brilliant. I mean, brilliant, and like where I got things wrong about the communist regime and whatever else happened to be, about Russia, about Paris at the time or whatever. But one of the notes really disturbed me, because he wanted me to cut an opening section that I had done about the Second World War, and it was part of my favorite section in the book, and and here it was, my hero, John Berger, saying, you maybe should think about cutting that 10-page section, and I think it's there, it's apparent already in the book. And I walked around for days and days and days on end, very upset, thinking, I love him to bits, and he's right about every single other thing but he's not right about that. And then when the book finally came out and I sent it to him, he wrote me another letter saying, you were exactly right, you kept that piece in, and he remembered that he had said, cut that particular section, and I sort of loved him even more for that, and he would read voraciously, and you know, I keep mentioning Michael, but Michael and Dace was like, they were like, knitted together in all sorts of ways, and sort of loved each other's work. You know, fun to think of them being together.
We have two questions from the audience. One of them, the first one is from Melissa Bracco, who says, now that you have the title for a potential biography of John Berger, A Patriot of Elsewhere, will you write it?
Uh, I wish I could. I think there are others who are better than me for that. And I think that particular piece of work is going to take a lot of time, and I could write an essay that responded to him, and a felt piece, but I don't think that I could write the proper sort of biographical, nor sort of engaged literary sort of piece that would be needed. I mean, I'm not that smart, and I think there's other people out there far smarter than me who could do that sort of thing. But yeah, I'm hoping I'm sure there's some. I mean, I know there's books written about him, but I'm sure.
There is a literary biography of Berger, that is maybe called a painter of our time or something. I mean, it's related to the title of his first novel.
Right.
But it's a literary biography, and I think that Melissa was more interested in, or maybe not, the stories about John, but from the perspective of another writer.
Well, maybe Melissa could do it.
And she's saying, yes, an essay too would be fantastic.
Okay, that's so nice. Thank you.
And then we have another question. Has there been a moment in your own writing process when you found yourself drawing on something from Berger or his work in a very specific or concrete way?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there was all sorts of things, but I wrote a novel called Zoli, which is, maybe not my best novel, but it's a novel that I sort of felt deeply, and it's about a Slovakian Romani woman, and it's based on the true life story of Papushka, who was a Polish-born poet, a Romani woman, and in the song that Zoli sings late in the novel, I got a lot of inspiration and asked John if I could use one or two of his lines, and suggested his lines were suggested to me as well, where I specifically took things and she felt aligned with John Berger in a way, this fictional creation, this poet, one of the things that's really important for us to mention is that John was very much, and even you go back to Ways of Seeing, the way he talked about about women, it was very, 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 very important that we acknowledge that he was a feminist, and he championed women, and he talked about the ways men looked at women, and the way women got looked at, and the way they got commercialized and exploited, and in advertising, and he loved the female spirit, and had a hugely female spirit, I think, in lots of different ways. So I think possibly just about everything I've done has drawn on Berger in certain ways. And one thing I want to say is also, even those writers that haven't read him are influenced by him, because he is such an important writer to other writers, that his influence enters the air. That I do think you can hear the ringing of his voice like a bell, down into the valley of where the other writers all happen to be. So we owe quite a debt to him, so we get our voice from the voices of others, and I definitely would say that I got a lot from John.
We have a comment from Gareth Evans. Tom Overton is John's archivist, editor of his two magnificent collections, Portraits and Landscapes, and currently writing his biography for Penguin. Oh, good to know. Okay, so it will likely be the definitive biography and brings life and work together. So due in a couple of years. It's wonderful news.
Great.
Yeah. I actually would just before that you were talking about the pervasive kind of invisible influence of John Berger and the way that you refer to that as a sound. And I just wanted to express my appreciation and gratitude. The way you read that excerpt from the novel was just wonderful because, you know, you read it, how should I say? I mean, it's you can feel that you're there when you're reading it, and the intonation and the, you know, it begins with this song, a wonderful song, you know, a couple of lines from some kind of poem that really brings it to life. So in order to kind of close our conversation, do you want to, is there anything that really, any, I don't know, anecdote, a story, or something that Berger has said that you would want to leave the audience with?
No, I mean, I feel that you got it, and that we hopefully have uncovered something. But I think what you're doing is incredibly important. You know, you're bringing a writer into a culture. You're publishing him in a magazine. You're translating him, and I think the only thing that people need to know is that we need more and more and more of that. Whether it be you know, in Bulgaria, or whether it be in Ireland, or whether it be like somewhere, you know, where, you know, John should be more known, like in France. I'm always stunned that he's not better known in France, having lived
Even though
there
you
for,
lived in France practically, you know, 2/3 of his life. Yeah.
yeah, and but people should know that when they find him, they will find a voice kind of like no other, and they will find a friendly voice, but also a warning voice about, you know, who we are, you know, what we are and what we are becoming, you know, so therefore I think, you know, we should listen, you know, as much as possible. If you want the easiest entry point in John Berger, I actually think To the Wedding is a really good place to start. And
Can
then
I make a
you know,
confession? To the Wedding
yeah,
made me cry. And
yes,
it's very rare that I cry reading
yeah,
books or even watching movies and so forth. But it's really, it's and it left an impression that you know, I then took the dog out for a walk, and I walked for an hour or two, and it seems like, you know, you're still in the novel. It's a really a wonderful
right.
book.
And we'll leave the last word to Michael Ondaatje, who said this about To the Wedding. He said, "A great, sad, and tender lyric. A novel that is a vortex of community and compassion that somehow overcomes fate and death. Wherever I live in the world, I know I will have this book with me."
It's absolutely amazing.
Which is just great, just great. It's nice, and yeah, so good entry point, and then go into, you know, the essays like Our Hearts, our briefest photocopies. What, you know, there's so much to read. Story of a Country Dancer, Ways of Seeing, Painter of Our Time, King. You know, gee, just delve in. It's a complex and beautiful meal.
Absolutely. So thank you very much, Colum. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and I'm very happy that we could have this. Thank you, Milena, for organizing, and the Foundation of Elizabeth Kostler for organizing this. It's been my pleasure and privilege.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, two of you. You are very fortunate to have known him, and we are very fortunate to have you both talking about. I just want to mention your most recent book, because while you were talking, you both mentioned that he self-described himself as a storyteller, rather critic, and in another conversation with Susan Zontag, he maintained that for him, telling stories is always in relation to the truth. And I've been thinking how maybe curious I am about his reaction on your most recent novel, Colum, Apiragon, which is about one of the worst contemporary conflicts. So I don't know if you are curious. I'm so curious about his take on his book. I wish I can give 1 week of my life to hear him talking about your book. Anyway, thank you so much. And I'd like to invite everybody to our next event from the series. Jeffrey Eugenides will be talking about literary web of influences, including Henry James and Alice Munro, among others. It will take place next week, June 21st, the same time. And you can check the Elizabeth Costello Foundation website for the link. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye, Colin.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Milenka.
Cheers. Bye-bye. Thank you.